Hello, welcome. Today, I'm going to give you a lecture on Asian American immigration and Asian American food history. This would be a great primer while you take this class. The learning objective today is to learn about Asian American migration, also to learn about Asian American foodways. Now, one of the first Asian Americans that arrived to the United States are Japanese, now Japanese Americans. They're mostly males, they're farmers. They moved to the Central Valley, Riverside, Hawaii, and basically they were looking for prosperity and they went into agriculture, farmers, fishermen, and they kind of lived mostly in Hawaii, California, Washington, D.C., Oregon, mostly as farmers, also as Alaska fishermen. Now, in the 1860s, Hawaii had between 400,000 Japanese Americans. And the difference between Japanese Americans and Hawaii is that it was actually males and females. But the Japanese in America, mostly in Los Angeles, Orange County, Riverside, and Central Valley, were mostly males. So that's going to be a big difference in second generation. Now, they mostly arrived in 85,000 arrived in Angel Island and San Francisco. Now, an interesting fact is that in 1907, they actually banned Japanese Americans from coming to this country, and it was called the Gentleman's Agreement. That severely impacted our foodways because they developed many things, such as the strawberry you see now. Did you know strawberries that you eat now are because of Japanese? We had a hard rock, tiny rock strawberry in America, but the Japanese brought over a juicy, large fruit from Japan and actually hybrided it together. And that's why you have juicy, large strawberries. So that is a major contribution that Japanese Americans have done. And fun fact, Japanese Americans are the ones who actually invented the fortune cookie. They actually have a Japanese cookie like that in Japan. And when they were in turn, Chinese Americans actually started selling them, but actually it's a Japanese American cookie. Now, a great book I want to recommend is The Epitaph for a Peach by David Matsumoto. Wonderful about Central Valley and how, his poem to a peach tree. Now, the second largest group that came to the United States was Chinese Americans. Again, mostly Chinese males. They came here to basically like send back money to their family, and they completely transformed, particularly Californian agriculture. You got to understand, California is full of rocks and trees and forests. And how do you think that had farmland to make it flat for acres and acres? It was one pivotal group, which is the Chinese. They came mostly and they settled in California, Hawaii, and they completely transformed the land. Now, interestingly enough, they were also railroad workers. So a lot of the hard fruits that you eat, peaches, plums, nectarines, where do you think those are from? They're not indigenous California. Those are from Asia, particularly from China. So they brought their labor, they brought their seeds, and they really brought a lot of their backbone to actually transform Americans' kind of foodways, especially Central Valley. Now, something that I would love you to read in our class is this article said Chinese laborers built Sonoma wineries, but racist neighbors drove them out. Now, have you ever drank wine, port, white wine, red wine? Well, if you look at the picture, who do you think actually made that ground flat so you actually can actually grow on it and made it fertile? You know what? It was the Chinese. And after they actually made it, flat land, they were driven out. And so that's really a secret story that you're learning here today about so much of our land was actually developed by Chinese. Another group that's underappreciated and lots of hidden stories is Korean Americans. They came here as plantation workers, mostly in Hawaii as pineapple workers and sugarcane workers. And their Korean brides, of course, they came as orphans and students, but mostly they came as farmers. They had to escape a political turmoil and famine. And there's a big demand of cheap labor, particularly in California, Dinuba in particular. And the Koreans came in smaller numbers than Chinese and Japanese, but they did come. And they were actually, some of them were refugees because their country was taken over by Japan during that time. So again, there's three waves. The first wave, mostly in California, I would say 9,000, developed totally the Californian citrus industry. Intermediate wave or second wave, 15,000, and then the contemporary over 1 million. So again, they came by boat. They mostly came because the 1965 Immigration Act and the War Bride Act from the Korean American conflict. And they very much developed, particularly in Dinuba and Central Valley, the citrus. Now, fun question. I'm going to ask you a question. Have you ever eaten a nectarine? Now, a nectarine, if you've never eaten it, it's like a peach. It's like a fuzzless peach. Well, guess what? If you've eaten a nectarine, I would like to introduce you to the two first Korean millionaires in America and the first Koreans who actually developed it with Anderson. This gentleman, Anderson, in Stockton in Central Valley, was actually a agricultural researcher, and with these two brothers, the Kim brothers, actually spliced two different trees together, and they developed the nectarine. So that's a fun fact that you can always share during a wonderful party. Again, a lot of people don't understand how much of a huge influence Koreans have had on American systems. Korean stores, and they always go into low income areas, particularly people of color areas such as California as well as New York. You could call it a food desert. And guess what? They bring in fresh vegetables and fruits. And guess what? They're very beautiful looking as well. They selected very beautiful fruits to show to the inner city food deserts. A lot of people don't understand the massive contribution that Koreans have made, not just the nectarine, but just moving in and offering very low cost fresh fruits and vegetables to food deserts all over the nation. Now, something interesting, another group that's also offered huge influence is Cambodian Americans. Now, they came here in 1975, post 1975. They were actually refugees from the 1970s, actually genocide that happened in Cambodia. Pol Pot was this Leninist Marxist who thought that Cambodia should be at year zero, and thus he murdered 1 in 4 Cambodians. He forced the rest to go into the farm to be farmers. So he killed all the doctors, all the lawyers, all the dancers. He took all the ballerinas and he shot them all in one day. So again, a very traumatic and very difficult history they had of the genocide of Cambodians. And of course, a lot of Cambodians fled. They fled to the United States. So for one example is the Chinese Cambodian group, an ethnic minority. Anyone who spoke a different language in Cambodia was immediately killed. So 50% of Chinese in Cambodia were killed. This guy named Ted Noy, he actually came and he ate his first donut, and he was like, this is delicious. So he proceeded to actually work at 3 donut places. And then he finally, after many years, as this documentary shows, he actually opened his first donut. And guess what? He supplied all the labor with his family members. And those family members, other Chinese Cambodian Chinese, brought over other Chinese Cambodian family members, and then brought over more. And now 90% of all donut shops in California are owned by Cambodians. So a really sweet outcome from a terrible history of genocide. So I invite you to watch Donuts Histories on YouTube. Now, the Lao Americans also have a tragic history similar to Cambodians. They came here because of the Secret War as well. During the Vietnam War, the US had a secret war and actually bombed into neutral Cambodia and Laos. Actually, Laos is one of the most bombed countries in the world. If you take all of War II combined, you'll still have more bombs in Laos. And so they were actually fighting because they're bombing the supply chain of North Vietnamese. And so what happened was some of the Laos fought against these U.S. troops, and some were with the U.S. troops. Again, they were a neutral country that was getting bombed by the U.S. And they actually fled as refugees into Thailand, and they came to the United States and California, mostly in Central Valley, as well as Michigan and Texas. They're actually scattered throughout the nation, and they're refugees, but they have hugely affected our food systems because a lot of the food that you eat, your carrots, lettuce, your broccoli, your citrus. Guess who farms it? That's Lao Americans. Yes, throughout California, Lao Americans are great farmers. Now, a great Lao restaurant, if you're ever going to Fresno, California, I highly recommend. And if you take a selfie and try some foods and maybe ask a question to the owner, you will get extra credit. So AC Deli in Fresno, California, you will get extra credit by going there and eating an item. Very low priced, you see, only $4 for a delicious shrimp roll or steamed fish. Has some bone in it. I like it that way, but some people don't. Bamboo shoots, very spicy papaya. So if you've never had it, definitely want to get the Thai style and also mild, wonderful egg rolls. And I highly recommend you try the kapoon, which is curry. But if you want to just have a soulful chicken noodle soup, kampiot, which is their chicken noodle soup, you could just say chicken noodle soup, really hits a spot. Highly recommend it. Now, a wonderful group that also came during this time and also very difficult circumstances is Hmong Americans. Hmong Americans are originally from China. They are part of the Miao group. All Hmong are Miao, but not all Miao are Hmong. They spread from China because of political difficulties, and they moved into different regions around Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand. And they actually were, during the Vietnam War, they were actually funded to actually fight for the United States in proxy. And because the US pulled out, lost the war, there was actually more economic and political difficulties after. And so they had to flee. And so many of them went into Thailand, and many of them, thousands of them, actually moved to the United States. Where did they move? Well, mostly in California, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and of course, scatterings all over, such as sprinklings in, Michigan, as well as Alaska and even New York. Okay. So they came post 1975, multiple waves. Some Hmong Americans have been here for over 50 years. Some Hmong Americans have been here 5 years ago. So again, massive differences in the Hmong American identity. Now, if you want to look, they have had a huge impact. Billions of dollars. They have primarily farmers in Central Valley. They supply a lot of the Asian vegetables and Asian fruits that are so desired in many Asian restaurants. And they're really ubiquitous in every single farmer's market. You're going to see Hmong Americans selling their beautiful and delicious fruits. Now, if you go to places like Washington, you're going to see the fresh flower growers are Hmong Americans. So again, massively underrepresented and underappreciated, massive kind of a contribution to the American foodways. Billions of dollars they've contributed. Now, another group that is quite large is Vietnamese Americans. Now, they came here obviously from the Vietnamese American War, similar to the Cambodian and Lao and Long. They came earlier, much larger group. The first group that came were elite, and the second group were boat people, and then the third and fourth were less educated. And they had resettlement programs, and they came all over, and they're spread out to Texas, California, Wisconsin, Florida. And then a large amount, 120,000 arrived just at 1975, but later over 1 million arrived in the next 2 decades. So again, they came with assistance and have transformed the U.S. foodways. And if anyone's ever had sriracha or ever been to any of these Vietnamese pho shops all over the United States, they have really transformed the American foodways in terms of their contribution in catching shrimp, for instance, and seafood, as well as foodways. So it's wonderful. And if anyone's had that Cajun shrimp from Louisiana or Texas, look no further than Vietnamese Americans. Another beautiful group that came and immigrated to the United States with difficult circumstances is Indian Americans. Now, they mostly came as males, and these males mostly married Mexican women, and they worked in sugar canes and also were coal miners and railroad workers. Lots of them actually came and lived in Central Valley. And a lot of times I have many students who are half Mexican and half Indian, and they are the literal descendants descendants of these original Indians. And I highly recommend, again, extra credit, there's something so delicious. I think it's #1 on Yelp, which is this curry a pizza. Again, not inexpensive because it's like lots of delicious, wonderful ingredients. It really deserves its price. And if you want to have the most delicious pizza ever, I recommend you try the tiki masala or the butter chicken pizza. Just delicious. And again, when you're eating that, you'll get extra credit, take a selfie. You're actually eating the history of Indian migration. And again, Indians completely transformed and contributed to the American foodways, particularly in Central Valley. Now, another group that's also not talked about are Filipino Americans. They came here really as agricultural workers and nurseries. They worked in canneries, they worked in Alaska, and they were basically kind of farming fruits and vegetables alongside Mexican Americans and Mexicans. They lived in California, Alabama, Louisiana. They came really early in the first wave, 1899, came from various acts. Now, have you heard of this person named Cesar Chavez? I feel like you have. Well, what's hidden from the history of foodways, Asian American foodways, is the impact that Asians have had. Did you know that the first uh, farm worker protest was actually not done by Mexicans, but was done by Filipinos? Here is Larry Ilatong. He was the first protester that protested for rights for Filipino workers. And again, Filipino workers, many of them spoke English, they spoke Spanish, very much different from other Asians, but they're mostly males as well. And so if you're interested in kind of farm workers' rights, well, look to the beginning of farmers' rights. It was Filipino Americans that actually protested their inhumane treatment. So again, I really want you to think about the forgotten Filipinos who led the farm workers revolution. There's a great article on that. I put the title on that. And also lots of anti-Filipino sentiment that people don't understand. You know, they actually very much developed our food systems, all our fruits and vegetables. They developed the land. That was a back-breaking land. But unfortunately, in the 1930s, there was the Watsonville riots. Watsonville is in Central Valley. And Filipinos were murdered because people were very jealous that they're working and they thought they're working for a low price. Okay, so again, here's Roger Gadeno left and Alex Elidor hold a photo of the grape strike leader, which is Larry Ilatong, and I really want you guys to learn more about that. Just wonderful food history that is forgotten and overlooked. One of the last groups is Thai Americans. Everyone's been to a Thai restaurant. They always love different Thai food. They came here as economic migrants. They mostly live in Los Angeles and New York. Very much upper class, generally for the ones who are documented. And they really reinvented Thai food for the American palate. They made it less spicy. They made it very easy for delivery, and it really cater to urban and suburban spaces. Who doesn't get Thai food at 11 o'clock at night? I mean, it's delicious. So again, that is just a short history of Asian American immigration and their effect on Asian American history. I hope you learned something from this video.